today. So we have a very special guest, Shaun Ganguly, who is the man to speak to in relation to retirement living and aged care financial planning and financial advice and all those sorts of things. So I'll hand it over to you for a second, but just a couple of housekeeping matters. We have bathrooms just down the hall here to the left. It looks like an escape door, but it's got bathrooms on it. After the session, we'll have some coffee and morning tea. You'll have a chance to speak to Shaun one-on-one if you like, or book a meeting with him in future. And we'll also do little tours for people that would like to go up and have a look at the display apartments. But yeah, have a great morning, and we'll hand it over to Shaun. There we go.
Hi everyone, Shaun from Retirement Village Financial Advice. So quick introduction about me. The reason I do this is basically I went through this with my own family. My grandparents, they bought their home in Geelong in 1967, and just going through that whole transition, when the house got a bit much for them after 50 years or so, then they transitioned into a retirement village, Aveo in Glen Waverley, and just helping them through that process. And I know me, at the time, being a fully qualified financial advisor, but struggling with all of the details because it didn't really have anything to do with so-called normal finances. And then, so helping them through that, and then going from that retirement village into aged care. Basically, the reason I do this is that I remember the mess it was for us, and I didn't want any other family going through what we went through. And the reason I love doing this is I had to learn all of this stuff for myself. And that's what made me choose to specialise in it and just become the expert in it. So that was a few years ago, and now I help families along this journey. So this seminar will be a lot about the changes that have happened. So I'll get into that. But Rob, can we just go on to the next slide, please? In terms of me, so when I'm not working outside, there's a few things that you'll normally find me doing. One of them is I'm a member of the Army Reserve. I've got a beard now that's grown out a bit, but there's a picture of me with no food, no sleep, after 5 days on a border protection operation. And after being wet, cold, tired, I got some noodles and someone decided to take a picture of me. So, and yeah, I'm often spending time with my kids, and I'm riding my motorbike, which I always like to bring in because it's one of the things that I love. It's not necessarily a financial investment, my motorbike, but I absolutely love it. And so, all right. In fact, I might just quickly jump in. The next slide, if...
Which one do I press?
Oh, just clicking work?
That one.
Hopefully that. Let me just quickly... Oh, here we go. That's all right. I might even hold it. All right, so... What we'll cover today are recent changes. For the first time in a long time, we've actually seen changes that have been positive for retirees and for people aged in their 50s and older. Over the last few years, I mean, as someone who specialises in retirement planning, I've seen things get considerably worse. Everything's been rolled back. So for once, I've got some positive changes to report. We'll be talking about why superannuation. A big question everyone has is around Centrelink entitlements. Now, Centrelink isn't just the age pension. Obviously, there's the age pension, which is good, but often when people downsize, there's other Centrelink benefits that come into it that we really need to talk about. Some of the retirement facts and fears, I mean, there's a lot of different stuff out there that I just want to talk about, what it actually looks like, the planning from someone who does this day in, day out. And in terms of just keeping stuff at the back of our head, as care options, as care needs increase, what does that mean? Everyone knows about nursing homes, residential aged care for later down the track, and it's a fairly well-structured system, but there's a lot of steps in between that we just want to make sure that we're using everything that you're possibly entitled to, that a lifetime of paying tax and everything gives you. So, and then we'll open it up for some questions. So can we go on to the next slide, please? So the recent changes. Has everyone heard of the downsizing contributions? We'll talk about that in a bit more depth. The superannuation contribution changes, they are huge. They've just been getting worse and worse, but now, for once, they've gotten a little bit better. And the Commonwealth Seniors Health Card, and that, For people in retirement villages, it becomes, generally speaking, a very important part. So, next slide, please. So why superannuation? It's one of these things with super, it's often not well understood what it is, and it basically, all it is a tax structure. You could have the same money, whether it's money in a term deposit, shares, whether you hold it in your personal name, in a company name, or in your superannuation. For someone like myself, before the age of 65, I'm not going to touch my super for a little while now. So potentially, you can pay up to 47% tax, not only on the income, but then capital gains later down the track. And the reason I bring up capital gains is that in the event that you might not spend all of your money and it might be going to future children or inheritances, whatever it is, most people love their children or their causes more than they love the tax office. So what superannuation does is it helps us actually keep that money within the family, keeps the earnings, rather than funnel it off and potentially lose a huge chunk of it in tax. And there's quite a few things that can help us do that. So for most people in super, they're paying 15% tax on all of these capital gains. And I'm assuming most of the people here are over the age of 65. One of the huge benefits is you've got this 0% tax environment. There's been some rules around that the government's tightened it, but they've opened up a few things too. And that's where there's a whole bunch of things we can do. Reduce tax, nominate beneficiaries, and whether or not it's in super, it basically has the same effect on pension and Centrelink purposes. So can we go to the next slide, please? When it comes to superannuation though, there were huge limits on when you could put money in. So when most people are younger, before the age of 65, up to certain limits, it was almost unrestricted. And after the age of 65, it became really, really difficult, where you had to meet certain work tests and you had to do quite a lot to get money in, almost made it damn near impossible to get any extra money in, because otherwise everyone would keep money in that 0% tax environment. That's where a lot of these changes have come in and can benefit from getting wealth basically taxed in your personal names and getting these big tax bills later down the track to getting that complete 0% tax environment. So one of the best option is, and we'll talk about money especially that's left over from the sale of the home. So next slide, please. There we go. Okay, so removal of the work test exemption. Between the ages of 65 and 74, previously, you basically had to work for a certain amount, meet the work test where you had to work 40 hours in a set period, 30-day period, in order to contribute to super, and there were very strict limits on what you could do. One of the massive benefits that has happened in this latest round of budgets and changes is that they've removed it. So now we can basically contribute up to that $110,000 into superannuation up to the age of 74 without working. So that's tax-free money. There's a lot of tax planning around the estate planning here, which has been of huge benefit. So this isn't on the slide, but one of the things I do like to talk to people about is that they don't realise that money that you've built up in superannuation by working salary sacrifice, if one person passes and it goes to the surviving spouse, no problems. But if it goes to non-dependent beneficiaries, i.e. adult children over the age of 25, which most people tend to have at that point, 17% of that taxable component by default gets taken by the tax office. No questions asked. So if we've got $1 million in super, $170,000 is gone like that before your kids have even seen it. There's things we can do to combat that from the very beginning, especially when we're in a position where we probably won't spend all of our money in our lifetime. And that's where things like the bring forward. You've got 110,000 in any financial year, but you can bring forward the next 3 years or the next 2 years and do 3 years worth of contributions. Previously, after 65, you couldn't use the bring forward. Before that you could, but then you could only do 1 year at a time. Now, this has been a complete game changer with what we're doing. The downsizer contribution, we're going to go into that in a bit more depth. In terms of the SG contribution, I'm just going to skip over that. But the thing with super is, because of that 0% tax environment for super, it's not for nothing. It's basically, you have to pull a certain amount of money out, depending on your age. And you've probably seen these anywhere from 5% upwards. What the government has done in the last year is they've halved that, or in the last 2 years, and they've continued that on. So we don't have to pull out as much money from superannuation. The vast, vast majority of people only pull out the minimum that they need from super. So this is something that has continued on, which again, lets us preserve the wealth in that 0% tax environment. Basically the best place to hold it. So we'll flesh some of these out in a little bit more depth. So if we can go to the next slide, please, Rob. Let's do a quick check-in. Is this all making sense so far? Like, is this... In refreshing? Perfect. The downsizer contribution has been a game changer. And what it lets us do is put $300,000, and it doesn't matter where it comes from, into superannuation after the sale of a home. Now, there's a few specific details. I've listed some, and there are more criteria. If we can go to the next slide, please, Rob. So previously it was 65. You had to be 65 or over to use this downsizer contribution, where basically if you've held a property for more than 10 years, for most people it's their family home. Once you've sold it, then what most people do is they look at downsizing. They're probably not buying that same big 4 or 5 bedroom family home that they lived in through kids, grandkids, everything else. And then there's a bit of money left over. And what it lets us do is put the money into super. And basically, we've got 90 days to do it, but one of the important parts is that there's no age limit. So previously, someone in their 70s, 80s, or let's just say 80s or 90s could not put any more money into superannuation, no matter what, basically. Now, you can. There's no age limit, and it's 0% tax environment, and we don't have the same limits that we do with others. So for a couple, that's an extra $600,000 in a tax-free environment that we can have, where you get the full franking credits, get all of the benefits straight in your own personal names. The big part also is that you don't have to do it using the sale proceeds. And this is where we start looking at the bigger financial situation. If there's taxable stuff in there, that sometimes we can pull money out of super to put it back in to save tax later down the track. You might have shares and other things that we might put into super. Everyone's situation is slightly different. But what it really does is it opens up a huge, huge opportunity to hold on to more of your wealth and pay less tax. It's as simple as that. That's basically what it lets us do. So can we... Yep. So that's probably the next biggest question though. What happens is we'll go on to a Centrelink pension refresher, but basically your family home is exempt. It doesn't matter if it's a $30 million Toorak mansion or a $300,000 house out in a regional area. Centrelink don't care about the value. Once we sell, most family homes in Melbourne tend to have a 7-figure price tag attached to them. Once we sell that and downsize, there's some extra money that Centrelink do assess. So what happens with that? So just on this refresher, what Centrelink do is they run either an assets test or an income test. For most younger people, while you are working, it's probably your employment income. And there's probably some people here who might have defined benefits or foreign pensions. Income is one thing, but for the majority of people that I come across, it's their assets. Cash, super. They might have sold their home and left some money and have some money sitting outside. It's assessed as an asset. So what happens is, as your assets or income increases, your pension reduces up to the point that it disappears. And it's based on being a homeowner or a non-homeowner. Just see, we're actually doing fairly well for time. So just while we're on this, I might even open this up just for a few quick questions before I start moving on. Are there any questions about Centrelink? Yeah.
Just going back to the downsizer contribution, is that a once-off?
It is a once-off. You can only use it once. So, yeah.
Thanks.
Perfect. Okay, we're going to build on this Any other questions on Centrelink or downsizers so far? So these assets or income, this is for the purposes of the pension. This will become relevant for other Centrelink tests and other things that come into it. So can we go to the next slide, please, Rob? So the most common question I used to get, and I still continue to get, is how much money before I lose my pension? So as a couple, basically you can have up to $901,000 if you're a homeowner. For most people, even if you're entering into a retirement village, if it's worth over a certain amount, over it's $216,000, you're classified as a homeowner. And you can have, as a couple, basically if you had $901,000, call it $400, you'd get a couple of dollars worth of pension, which also has some massive benefits. But these are the thresholds which apply. These strategies, I'll briefly cover off on some of these. So in terms of pension, hiding money away, that's a lot of people want to know, well, what can I do to increase my pension? We're allowed to only gift a certain amount. It's only $10,000 per financial year. When I worked at the bank, I had clients who had millions of dollars and they said, well, I should get a pension. Can I just give money to my daughter or son and then give them my $4 million and then I'll get the pension, won't I? And the answer is no. They'll count it as an asset for 5 years. It's not that easy, but we can gift small amounts. There's a few other things that we can talk about, but in terms of, I guess, retirement village options, and this is where the difference between some of the different contract options come in. How much you pay up front can have huge, huge implications on the pension. And given that the pension is an extra $25,000 a year for a single person or an extra $35,000 or so, thereabouts, for a couple, it's a very important consideration to make. And that's just the pension. Then we've got all of our concession benefits and health card that I'll go into. And that's where sometimes talk about more luxurious accommodation. Sometimes that can be a great option too. And we're not going to have a chance to talk about this, but lifetime income streams in the last few years, there's been huge, huge benefits where there's certain assets where we can get 60% of that exempted from asset testing. So that might be for a future one. But if we go to the next slide, please, Rob. So these cards, hopefully most people have seen one of these two cards, and hopefully, most of you over the age of 65 have got one of these two. One of the things I get very, very often is, so the pensioner concession card, you just need to be eligible for $1 worth of pension. When I worked at the bank as a retirement specialist, a lot of my planning was around just making sure people had just the right amount of pension so they were eligible for a small amount. Why? So they'd get this pensioner concession card. Rates become cheaper. Rego becomes cheaper. Medicines, there's a whole bunch of benefits that we can go into. I've got a whole fact sheet on this. This thing is worth its weight in gold. It's worth thousands of dollars. Where people aren't eligible for a pension, the Commonwealth Seniors Health Card comes in. Now, it doesn't have the same benefits when it comes to Rego and all of these other benefits that come in, but one thing that happens is you get huge benefits when it comes to your pharmacy and other medical expenses. And I was talking to Russell. I've dealt with 2 clients in this last week who were eligible for it and just didn't really know about it. And sometimes because you have to deal with Centrelink, which is an absolute nightmare, becomes honestly, the too hard basket, because then they're probably going to, like we were talking about you need these birth certificates provided in this way, standing on one leg, talking to this other person while presenting at this time, and then they close this. It becomes an absolute mess. But just knowing the rules around it, even there's a whole different set of rules that apply to the Commonwealth Seniors Health Card. So for anyone over the age of, basically pension age, it's a must. And we'll talk about and it doesn't have the same asset or income tests that the pension does. So can we go to the next slide, please? This is one of the greatest changes that has happened. So previously, your adjusted taxable income as a couple had to be below $92,000. And especially where we had dividends and other things, it doesn't include things like super. But one of the big changes is that, and it's almost flown under the radar, is that now for a couple, it's gone up to $144,000. So eligibility has massively, massively increased. I had a lot of clients who, they were right on the cusp. They were losing their pension due to, they were losing their Commonwealth Seniors Health Card, or they were right on the limit due to their shares and dividends and other things coming in. Since these changes, it's made things a whole lot easier. So another reason why majority of people I come across have some kind of eligibility, or we can engineer that eligibility through other strategies, because and we'll talk about the stages of retirement, but typically as we get older, medical costs, pharmacy costs, everything increases. And if we're in the category that you're looking at a Commonwealth Seniors Health Card, you've probably paid a ton of tax over your lifetime. Now's the time to get something back for it. So, next slide, please. Okay, biggest fears in retirement. As a specialist retirement planner, these are the fears that I've just thought of and that I've dealt with over the years. One of them is running out of money. Most people would spend more money if they didn't think they were going to run out. And the thing is that it's not always logical here. So it's just having that permission to enjoy. It's a lifetime of hard work. And if people knew, most of my clients, if they knew exactly where they would stand, they'd enjoy their money and they'd enjoy the fruits of their labour. Which is also balanced by, and I think this is perfectly valid, about wanting to leave assets to family. It's not just all about spending all of the money on yourself. Most people, they've got children, grandchildren in some way, shape or form. They want to make sure they're looked after, which is really important. And it's making sure that, and it is a different world that we're entering into, but doing this in the best possible way. One, so the tax office doesn't take too much of a bite out of it, minimal where possible. But it's also balancing this in an aeroplane context so that you can you're applying your own oxygen mask before you apply someone else's. So you're looked after, you've done all of the things that you want to do, but your children are also looked after. Now for maximising entitlements, as everyone knows, there's a whole bunch of entitlements when it comes to pension. I hate when I see pension being left on the table. I see it all the time, where again, people don't apply for things or they've tried and then Centrelink have made it so difficult. And especially once we look at care needs and other things that come in, it becomes really, really important. And we will hopefully get into that. And getting the care that we need at the right time. I mean, no one really wants to, a common theme that I get from a lot of people, they don't want to be a burden on their children, and making sure that they can look after them, having a situation where they can get the right care at the right time. Now, that doesn't mean in your early 60s going straight into a nursing home at all. It's just a graduating, there's so many different step-ups to that people just aren't aware of. Why? Because the system's so bloody complicated. There's so many different things out there, so it's just making sure we're getting the right thing at the right time. No more, no less. Yep?
Excuse me. You're going to talk later about minimising what the taxman is going to take from you. Number two, leaving assets to the family.
Absolutely. Oh, let's see how we go question-wise, but that's a big part of what I do. So yeah, we'll definitely talk about that if we have time. And the reason I think this is important is there's this trifecta, this health, time, money. When you're young, I've got young kids, so for me, I don't have time. Money, health, yeah, I've got. And when you're younger, you've got all of the health in the world, you probably don't have and you've got time, probably not as much money. And as you get older, if we really go to that last stage, then you typically have a lot more time, a lot more money, and sometimes that's when the health starts to fade a little bit. So for most people that I come across in retirement communities, they've got this golden trifecta. This should be the best time of your life. Normally from 60 to 80 kind of time frame, especially now, that's when you've got the health, you've got the time, you've got the money. Now is the time to go do all of the things, enjoy all of the things, because you might not be able to in the same way later down the track. I'm fairly harsh about this, but a lot of what I do as a retirement planner is try to force people to encourage them to go do those things that they've always wanted to do, but not feel guilty about it, not go on a holiday and feel like crap, can I afford this thing? And there is a healthy balance there. So if we can go to the next slide, please. And that's where, look, this traditional approach, if you see most of these numbers, and this is why I absolutely hate some of the stuff the super funds put out, you need $1 million in retirement and blah, blah, blah. It's just not how it works. As a practitioner, realistically, what happens is most people, when they first retire, when they leave full-time work or they gradually reduce their initial employment, the reason that's the highest is that's when they go do all the fun stuff. That's when you want to go travel, get the motorbike, do all of those things that you've always wanted to do because you've got it. Basically all of the grey nomad fun things. And a lot of the time that doesn't involve being around the home. And we'll go into the maintenance and other things. But then gradually, and there's certain people, hopefully, you know, there's people in this audience who can identify with some of these stages that as we get on retirement, then we basically stop that initial expenditure and it tends to reduce a little bit. And this isn't always linked to age, it's more linked to phases. So you've got your carefree years and then you've got your quieter years, things quieten down. Again, at that point, do you really want to look after maintenance, a whole bunch of other things? It's just having a nice, relaxing time with spending time around the people that you care about, doing the things that you want to do. And what I find is the third phase, that's when costs can potentially increase. That's where we start looking at things like aged care and other more assisted living, tends to be in the 80s. And that's almost also the point where more money doesn't necessarily help. And in fact, it can be a detriment. That's the point where, realistically, having an extra $50 million in the bank does absolutely nothing to someone's quality of life. So there's a huge focus that I place on that phase one of retirement, enjoying that, making the absolute most of that, because you'll only get one chance at it. So next slide, please, Rob.
We've got some nice apartments here you can spend your money on too.
Yeah. But that's why, I mean, that's why I believe in it. Look, personally, I've got nothing to do with these apartments. I do retirement village financial advice. I went through this with my own family. So my grandparents so they bought their home in Geelong in 67. You can imagine a typical 5-bedroom, big block. They didn't have small blocks in Geelong back then. And they just got to the point where my grandpa, he was very handy, had a whole tools shed and everything. But just keeping a house alive and doing all of those things, it stopped being fun. And even from a social aspect, when you live in a fully detached home, they moved into the Aveo in Glen Waverley. They had a community centre, and I'm looking at just these areas here and how amazing it all looks, just being around people, not having to do all of those general day-to-day home maintenance stuff that I'm sure everyone's done here for the last however many years. But being able to actually spend more of their time on their interests and whatever that is. I know for my family, a lot of them, it was my grandfather getting involved in IT and the University of Third Age in his older years. And the other part is care. At the moment, unfortunately, home care, which I'll talk about, it's almost impossible in normal homes. It's just there's such a big backlog, getting the right level of care, trying to get that right can be done, but as most people, I don't see them staying in that big family home that was perfectly appropriate when they were younger, but as they get older, it just doesn't fit their needs as well. Next slide, Rob.
The manager here is not square, though.
I'm not going to read out all of these, but you can have a look. But things like the community centre and just the emergency call, the top three are the ones that I saw my family use the most. And that's a big part of why most...
Hopefully one day.
But this is where, I mean, and we'll go into how these home care and service packages as things go on, but yeah, if we can go to the next slide, please, Rob. See if we're on for time, yeah? There we go. And those are, I mean, in terms of the pros and cons of retirement living, we can read up some of these, but basically it's a lifestyle choice. That's why you do it at the end of the day. It's, in terms of your normal living, having people around you, being able to do what you need to do, convenient access to services. Somewhere like here is great, just with walking distance to shops, and not having to do, when even things like house maintenance and gardening, it's not like a normal 4-bedroom home, trying to look after mowing the lawns, that stress, and having and a lot of the time for people, most of their funds are tied up in the family home, and freeing some of them up to actually enjoy it and having that freedom to go and basically do all of the things you want to do. Now, some of the cons, realistically, these are just is the loss of independence. Living in apartment living, most people aren't used to that. And they find that they're just not used to living in apartments. Most of us have probably come from detached homes. So it does take a bit of getting used to, and it's definitely not for everyone. The friends and family, again, it depends. And I've talked to a few people in this room who have left the areas that they're from, so that can be an issue. I know the biggest one, and this is what people talk to me about, is that they don't understand the contracts. And I know how much I struggle with the contracts myself. So every contract's a bit different. And just looking at it and not only understanding what the contract is, but what does it actually mean for me? What do these things, how does it play out? What are some of the other options? What are the next steps? And a very common one is where people it's one of two very binary choices. They don't feel ready, or they feel like they've left it too late. And it's interesting just looking at the age mix here. But I'm not sure, like here there's always different options available, and it's probably not as well understood about the care needs and what happens where as care needs increase, then what do we do? How do we get looked after? So I might even just pause here for a second. Are there any either pros or cons? Is there anything that, just even for my own, like that I might have missed that jumps out to anyone in this room that for me to add for my next one too?
Well, you can lock it up and walk away.
Yeah.
No one gets secure.
Yeah.
Like visit family interstate or overseas.
Yeah, absolutely.
And I mean, it's a terrible thing to bring up, but the lawlessness that's getting around, people breaking into houses or pinching tools out of your car. Yep. The chances of that happening here are much less.
Yeah, it's slim. Yeah.
Where do you park your caravan?
Well, that's one of the questions I normally ask. There are places that have, there are retirement villages with caravan parking. And again, it's just the right option for the right person. If you had a 25-foot caravan that you wanted to keep on site and then you're travelling for half the year, then an apartment style might not be the best option. It might be, you might keep it somewhere else, and that might be part of your plan, that you're going to do that for 5 years, but there are others where it's one of these considerations, and it's just finding the right choice. So and that's exactly right. So for certain people, if it's travelling overseas, something like this might be perfect. If you know for the next 10, 15 years, you're going to continue to do laps and reverse laps and then up the guts and, with the caravan, then having a place where you can leave it for the summer months might be and it's just finding the right option for the right person. But they're out there, and
You're also the availability of visitors coming. That's a big thing too, allocated for visitors.
yeah, that's,
Here does it very well. It's got car parking, motel room.
yeah.
If you're resident, yeah. And that's a big thing to other things. Someone to come in, they can park their car in the cover, not worry about everything else. It's really, we found that a big thing.
Yeah, absolutely. Yeah, I was happy with that here, like just parking here as opposed to, and that's where there's some great ones in the city, like, a retirement living style high rise, but, Is it easy to have the whole family around and have 5 cars parked all afternoon? Maybe not. Maybe for someone who that's important to, that might not be the great. So that, yeah, that's a really good point.
We have one question.
Yeah.
When we, move on
Ye-
from this world,
Oh, from this way, okay.
what happens to the property that we own? Can we pass it on to our children or?
How do we bequeath it?
Yeah, so generally speaking, what you'll find, and that's one of the things that I'd probably take you through in the contract, what happens in the initial part. So generally speaking, there'll be some sort of buyback or there'll be a set procedure in place. Rob might have but
Yeah, unfortunately, it's not really designed to be able to hand it down to a family member, but the money from the refund can go to the estate and they can buy in if they want to, or we could do a special deal where you might sell it to them for a little bit less than what another person might pay for it. Yeah, but typically it's retirement living. The financial model and the way they stay in business is that there is an exit fee which contributes to the running of the place. Yeah.
one thing
the stamp duty and so forth on those purchases?
No.
No.
on these, yeah, generally that's they yeah,
So
No stamp duty.
no stamp, yeah.
We also found there's a big variation on, like, your fees, how much you lose per year.
Yep.
And if you look into it, there's a very big variation. That's one thing you've really got to take into account.
Absolutely. Yeah, I couldn't agree more. And this is one of the things where retirement villages aren't exactly like buying a home. And it's just important knowing understand the contract. And this is where sometimes just having an independent third-party professional take you through it and explain, this is what it is, this is how it works, these are your options, this is what it means to you. And just because you've been, so like I see, I'm not aligned I don't have anything to do with any particular retirement village. I deal with them all over. I'm in Melbourne, but I also deal with Sydney ones too. Every single village has a different style of contract and different options. So if I'm talking to someone to help them, I'll usually ask for their disclosures and a few other things for me to get my head around to explain it in plain English. So that becomes really important. Yeah.
Shaun, who's the best person to ask to help you to understand the contracts? Would it be a lawyer or would it be someone like yourself?
It's generally a combination, to be honest. I guess we start because most of the things have financial implications in how we do it, and I can talk day in, day out about that. That's what I do. But usually there are some specialist lawyers here, independent lawyers who we refer to, because as much as I see these contracts, I've got an external understanding of legalese isn't my forte. So sometimes both, but in the context of these, having both is probably not the worst idea either. I would. We did, when I went through this process with myself, we got legal advice and the financial stuff. I wrapped my head around just doing this, but the only, just one thought I had though was about the home is that it's an interesting one so I deal with, like my other business is aged care financial planning. So I do a lot of aged care advice where one thing I see just funnily is that homes very rarely get bequeathed, kept intact. It's probably a minority of cases where it does happen every now and again where there's a very strong sentimental attachment. What I find is usually within about 5 years, the home gets sold anyway. It's just an interesting one, even where there's very strong desires to keep it. And then sometimes people find getting a home ready for rental in this current environment where you have to do all of these renovations, it almost becomes more of a headache. So that's just a observation. But next slide, please, Rob. And this is where I could honestly spend the next 2 hours talking about this. So I'm going to whiz through this a little bit. But basically what happens is that in terms of the broad options, we've got the Commonwealth Home Seniors program, which is usually by the local council. There's like what I call the baby assessments called a RAS, Regional Assessment Service. Anyone who's over 65 should be getting one of these. And it's on a user pays basis. So you might get some basic services, and that will just top up anything that you receive here potentially. Everyone's a little bit different, and it's important to see what you can get. Home care packages become really, really important in private homes. they're almost next to impossible to get due to wait list, shortage of staff at the moment. However, there are a lot of retirement villages that have certain agreements with home care providers where they look after things on a wholesale level, and we can get a higher level of tailored care. So getting that in the private home, just tailoring that, most homes weren't built to care for people with escalating care needs. I know for my house, definitely couldn't. But so how these work, and a home care package comes through an aged care assessment. Now that is the cheapest form of insurance anyone will ever get. It's free and it doesn't expire. I think anyone over the age of, I'd say about 70 or with any kind of ill health should get an ACAT assessment. In this area, there's a 3-month wait to get one of these at the moment. But get on that waiting list, just get on it right now. I'd put that, call my aged care or jump on the website. Because once you've got that, there's a whole bunch of other things I think about for future care, but it just can't hurt. So we go to the next slide, please, Rob. So, I'll give everyone copies of these slides. I don't want to read out everything, but with home care, all this personal care and allied health, there's a whole bunch of benefits that it can offer. And think about it a bit like a smorgasbord of options that are available to choose, that they will tailor the package for the right person. Everyone's got different needs. And whether that's physical, cognitive, they'll tailor something according to the level that you've got. Go to the next. And obviously things like home modifications, you won't need to spend your budget on any of that, which is what a lot of people at home have to do. So there's a whole bunch of funding, and we'll go into the fees in a bit of depth, but basically there's an income tested fee which works a little bit differently to everything else. So can we go to the next slide, please, Rob? Is anyone here who's utilised home care services at all or had a aged care, if you don't mind me asking, has anyone made use of any of these?
For my mum.
For your mum, yeah, great. Yeah. So maybe, can we just go one ahead? Let me just see if I've got my levels. No, let's go back one, please, Rob. Now I'm going to shoot from the hip a little bit, but if we just, what they do is there's 4 levels of home care that are on offer. There's levels 1, 2, 3, 4, depending on how acute your care needs are. Now, a level 1 is very low level, and I would recommend people just get on the wait list. And I know if people are talking about their parents, they're probably looking at level 3s, level 4s, where then we're looking at $60,000, $70,000 worth of funding, and even there's an income tested fee. But what happens is that it's relatively cheap. The most you can pay, the annual cap on a home care income tested fee is $11,000 per annum, which in the context of tens of thousands of dollars worth of care received, I think of as nothing. And for most people, that's what stops them from going into a nursing home, and it allows them to stay in place. And most retirement villages are very well equipped to accommodate that. And again, it's a consideration that I'd be talking about and asking about. As care needs increase, what can we do to keep us at home? So there is a lifetime cap that also counts towards residential aged care, which is great, but effectively there's a whole bunch of government funding involved. That's why I like to include that second one. So things like dementia, cognition, feeding, depending on the services you need at that time, and you might not need these for another 10, 20 years. But when that comes, this is honestly, getting one of these and getting used to the provider and the service is the difference between staying in place at a nice place like this and having to move into a nursing home. And the other good part is, one of the changes in 2017 is that there's some very strong laws that Victoria in particular has, so I love dealing with these Victorian Melbourne rules, that should aged care be required down the track, basically funding becomes relatively easy between the retirement village and a future nursing home, which might happen for some. But yeah, and this is where just that private care, it's so different. So there are some retirement villages out there that have their own care, outside of the home care system that they use to top up their own services as part of that village. Otherwise, some people get their own little private top-up care. Everyone's completely different, and there are people who specialise in this. But it's just important knowing what you need now, what can come, because realistically, everyone's needs are going to change. So if you've got that at the back of your head before making that initial decision, it also becomes really important. But the good part is a lot of these villages are literally set up for exactly that. So,
Shaun, do you have many clients, like I'm thinking about my parents who could probably be on a level 1, level 2 care package, but I think they're too embarrassed to go down the path, or they don't want the care car sitting at the front and the neighbours seeing that someone's helping them. Is that a normal thing that people go through? Or?
Yeah, it is actually. Men are the worst for this. Blokes in their, especially able-bodied blokes in their early 70s, trying to get them to do an aged care assessment. Just don't want to, there's definitely a lot of that. And I've heard that too, having the Bolton Clark car outside your home. Oh, people think I'm going, whatever it is, that I need that level of care. Happens all the time. Honestly, sometimes I normally just have to look at the wife and I just make him do it, just call it, organise it and sit beside him. Because sometimes when the assessment gets done too, look, you want to tell the person the truth. You want to say, you don't want to make up your care needs or anything like that, but you also don't want to appear, I've got people who, again, it's mainly blokes in this category. It'll probably be me in a few years' time, so I can't. But where they'll have the assessment and they'll tell the person, no, I'm fine. I walk 15 miles a day. I do this. I climb up on my ladder. I do that. And then the person goes, oh, okay. So then they're a level 1. They turn around and the person falls. So here, the name of the game, in a way, is because it's something that doesn't expire, and there might be a big wait. So even if, Rob's parents, without knowing anything else about them, they might have been assessed at a level 1 or 2. Maybe, let's just say they would have been assessed at a level 2. But by presenting too strong an image, they might have come in at a level 1. They've just cut out 10, 20 grand worth of funding right there for home modifications and other things, and it doesn't expire. So it's a bit of a long-winded answer, but my recommendation is, yes, it probably is the case, but do it anyway, because it's only between you and that aged care assessment, and the services you need will be tailored towards you anyway. Yeah?
Can you use it in this environment, like once you come into a retirement place?
Absolutely.
Yeah, that's often one of the benefits of living in a place like this, is because after time, as residents' needs change, they generally have the same care operators coming in and out, and then we eventually will hopefully have, like at some stage in the future, maybe 1 or 2 carers that are on site, or you're not spending money on them travelling or their unreliability. There's it sort of evolves organically in these places, so it's more reliable basically.
Yeah, so that's a really common scenario where, let's just say there's a 4-bedroom house next door to this place, and you lived here, and then you've got a neighbour, and then you've got, let's just say you're identical in care needs, assessments, you've got them done at the same time. Here might already have a home care provider coming in, doing everything they need to do. That I would wager a bet, it's all done through government systems, but you, given the fact that you were here, you would probably get the care faster than they would, because they're probably already servicing 7, 8 other residents as part of that plan, probably with similar care needs. Because, look, sometimes I find that if it was, as an example, dementia, you probably wouldn't see it as much in a place like this, as opposed to a retirement village specialises in that. So yeah. Yeah.
I can see the problem with people pretending they're better than they are, but I also didn't really understand why you said everyone over 65 should get tested, because I'm over 65 and I don't see one reason why I should get tested.
Yeah. So in terms of tested, the RAS is just basically an interview where they ask you about some of your services. So as an example, some of those services don't necessarily need to be feeding services and meals on wheels or people driving you places. It could often just be a handyman, where instead of paying $80 or something, you'll pay $10. Now that's for someone in a normal home. And even if you got something like a level 1 or a level 2 or low care respite, having that does not do you any harm. So just having that in place can be, should your care needs escalate, you've already got these codes and things in place. And if there are some Commonwealth home support services that you need, it's on a user pays basis. So if you've already got your assessment in place, you can make use of it. If you don't, and you're a perfectly fit, healthy 65-year-old, as an example, 65 is probably the lower age of that, but once we look at about 70, I'd say absolutely get it done.
Well, I am 70 actually.
Yep.
Level 1 typically only is cleaning and a lift to the shops.
Yeah.
And very basic.
And honestly, if I could get a cleaner come around to my place for $10 an hour, I'd love it. Like, you know, I'll tell them whatever I have to. I'd pull out my. But that's all it is. Realistically, it's not income. If it's under the Commonwealth Home Support Program, it's not income tested. So it's not income asset tested. Doesn't really matter. You could be a complete self-funded retiree, and you can get some subsidised services, and your tax dollars and your council rates can actually be put to some use. So. Like, don't embellish, but just tell them about, you know, like realistically, I mean, I think about my dad. He's in his, I think, mid to late 60s, thereabouts, 67. I don't want him climbing up on ladders anymore. Yeah, he could have done that a few years ago, but like now, if he can get that subsidised to get someone doing it for $10, $20 or whatever the cost is, absolutely, put the rates to some use. It's just from that perspective. Or the other only one I'll add to this a little bit is if you've got an older spouse, sometimes having respite codes, like if they do need to go into just a small period of respite in an aged care facility, normally with that aged care assessment, with the code, it'll generally cost $54 a day to go in. If you don't have a code, then we're looking at $280 a day. And so sometimes if you've got a younger spouse who's already got it in place, so this was my grandfather. He didn't go into aged care because he needed any care. He went in to accompany his wife of 50 years so they could live together, and they continued to, and sometimes just being able to do that. So that's another reason to just consider it. Everyone's needs are different though. So, yeah. Oh, any other questions? I'm about to summarise anyway, so if there's, but yeah.
One of the, and this isn't a question, just a statement, but your advice to get the aged care assessment done, whether you use it or you don't, it's most important, because things can happen very suddenly that you're just not expecting.
Yeah. And it's what we call in the industry the oh crap car park conversation, where someone might wind up in hospital and then the social worker or the discharge nurse basically says, look, and probably not as much of an issue here, but they can't go back to the family home. They can't, like, we need to discharge them from the hospital because we've fixed the hip, we've done whatever it is. Now they're ready to be discharged from the hospital, but they can't go home. You need to find somewhere yesterday, and they apply some pressure. Having that without an aged care assessment, without some kind of just backup plan at the back of your head, at least that old crap car park conversation. I've had these with people on Friday nights in tears, families just in a, called from hospital. What do we do? And that's where,
I guess I just sort of feel like it'd be embarrassing to go through it and then not get assessed for anything.
Yeah.
That's the bloke's job.
No, you look, no, honestly, you're right. And I'm not going to, it might be.
And be told you're not level 1.
Yeah, but that's probably, I'd take that as a compliment. But no, I agree. You are right. But there's different assessments though. Just the RAS assessment, the Regional Assessment Service, and the aged care assessment, they're two different things. Even though they're administered, they'll ask different questions.
It'd be probably a learning exercise just to go through it anyway, right? Because the whole thing is a minefield.
Yeah.
Without your help.
Yeah. Oh, and even with my help though, like if you've already got something in place, even if you're registered with My Aged Care, your life will become a whole lot easier than going through it from scratch. And but yeah. Cool. Let's go to the next slide, please. So just to summarise, there's a heap more opportunities to get money in that tax-free environment. In terms of super, all it is a tax structure. You can hold it in term deposits, shares, the same stuff you normally do, buy properties, whatever. The only difference is 0% tax, and by putting it in through a downsizer contribution, that 17% government bite won't be taken out. You may still be entitled to a healthcare card, and especially now, and there's a whole bunch of tricks that, you know, as a financial planner who does this, I've got the Social Security law guides as my bookmarks. That's what I do, that's my job. There are a whole bunch of tricks, even if on surface level, that you're not eligible, things that we probably call shelter strategies and other things, to get you more entitlements. They're out there, and they're changing, they're getting better. We haven't covered it today, but a whole bunch of stuff has changed. From a lifestyle perspective, you won't get a second chance at this. Like these should honestly be the best times to go do all of those things. We talked about, you know, having somewhere that you can just leave and just not worry about everything, the, you know, place being burgled, travelling, whatever that is, lifestyle, having family around without worrying about cleaning up for the next day, you know, with the whirlwind that the grandkids have left, or whatever it is. I do that to my parents at the moment. So, but this is seriously the time, money, health tends to be that golden trifecta, that now's the time to make the most of all of that. And we'll get onto the questions about estate planning. Those are important too, but just keeping these all in, taking these all into account. In terms of future care options, just being Victorians, we've got probably one of the strongest rules around getting care and then graduating from this lower level of care, which this isn't really care, but should needs increase down the track, which they probably will for everyone, that we've got very, very strong rules that help you get looked after at that next stage, both at probably that lower levels, that Commonwealth home support, onto home care to potentially residential aged care for some. So, summarise, that's what I've got. Any other questions? Oh, next slide is just one that says questions to... Oh, no, okay, no, it's our role. And look, what we do is we basically just help people take the stress and anxiety out. For majority of people who go through this, it's the first time in their lives, and they probably won't go through it again. I've done this hundreds, probably thousands of times, and just help clients know exactly what they need, lay out a clear roadmap so they know exactly what they're doing and they've got a permission to enjoy. Let's think of one example. I've got a client, he's got millions of dollars in super, trying to convince him to go buy. He'd never bought a brand new car. He'd been working since the age of 15. I convinced him with all of the logic in the world. He went and bought a brand new Prado. So, and just having him actually enjoy that thing after a lifetime of work, I'm big on that, the permission to enjoy that, not worrying about what's this going to do. Maximising your entitlements and just things that you've worked your whole life contributing towards, not leaving money on the table, because I'll tell you what, I'll bet you, it's better off in your hands than in Centrelink's and the tax officers. So, and then it's just being your independent translators and advocates just through this whole process. It's a minefield. There's all of this different stuff, getting it right for you. That's basically what we do. And the other big one, just if I go straight to the bottom, is helping family disputes. Sometimes get involved in that. It's usually when everyone knows what they're doing, why they're doing it. It keeps everyone on the same page, lets you live your best life, lets your kids know what's going on too, and just a good harmonious, everything that we want, less stress. So next slide please, Rob. That's the question one. So, if there's anything any questions regarding anything that we've...
Just one question, Shaun.
Yeah.
Is it Ganguly Enterprises, or when you say we?
Yep.
How many are there of you?
So in terms of what I do, I'm the sole senior financial planner. I've got 4 full-time staff who help me, and a full-time person on Centrelink. But that's how we work. Yeah.
Do you have trouble with Centrelink, and how long it's on the phone before they get an answer?
Yeah, that's a great question. I have a full-time person who solely looks after Centrelink. Michaela is an absolute angel. what she does is we've got templates, because Centrelink, a lot of it is about communication with them. We've probably got, and hopefully there's no ex-Centrelink employees here, but you've probably got the lowest common denominator contract staff member. So yes, we have plenty of problems with Centrelink. That's why I've got someone who spends 40 minutes, 1 hour on hold. But the reason it works for us is she'll look after, she'll be like, okay, now we've got Jane Smith, CRN this. So we'll do 20 calls in one hit. Every Centrelink issue, we've probably dealt with it 100 times before. So that's why, that's what makes it easy for us. If we were doing it for one client, we wouldn't do it. That's why most people don't. But yeah. But yes, absolute nightmares. Bane of our existence. A lot of my job is having to explain to, and Michaela and myself having to explain to Centrelink how their own rules work. That's honestly.
I asked the question because before coming to live here,
Yep.
I was on a pension and I have a financial advisor and they put the paperwork in thinking I'm not eligible for the pension anymore. That was back in September last year.
Yep.
I'm still receiving it and I'm told that I would have to pay it back, so I
Yep.
don't want that. But I don't want to receive it and
No.
yet nothing is happening.
Look, with respect to your financial plan, this is one of those things. So I've worked at other financial, practices. They probably don't have. When it comes to dealing with Centrelink, it's a whole other thing. If you look at the reason, they probably need someone to spend 2-3 hours, go through a certain process, and they're probably not going through the same process with you as they are with other people. I'd get that. I'd get on that immediately because Centrelink often do have penalties and other things, and then and then sometimes they'll say within 14 days. So this stuff is fairly common. It happens all the time. And what we find is, we've been doing this for years. When we submit something to Centrelink, we know that it's done with precision. Most of Michaela's time is, my Centrelink angel, most of her time is actually getting them to process stuff that we've submitted correctly. And that, I imagine that's all it is. Someone's probably picked it up, it's gone in the too hard basket, they've left it, and then you might have called someone else.
Well, there's been follow-up phone calls, but just nothing is happening.
Yeah, sometimes honestly, it's knowing we do this day in, day out. We've got a whole Centrelink area, knowing the Centrelink blueprint, knowing exactly what they're, for the academics in the room, knowing something like their assessment criteria. So when you present it in that way, it's like the dummies guide. So no matter whatever that person is on the other side, if you guide them and tell them, now do this, now do that, it'll get done. Is it time consuming and labour intensive? Absolutely. I'd say that's what's happened. And yeah. And not a plug, but we often work with other financial planners just because what we do is very specialised. I think a lot of people have their own financial planners who they'd have their own book of clients, but they'd never deal with retirement villages and Centrelink stuff. Why would they? That was me previously. So we can have a chat after where we can talk to your financial planner, handle that part of it for you, get it all cleaned up, without, it's not threatening the other planner. Yeah.
Have you got name cards?
Yes, I've got a whole bunch of cards and I've got feedback forms too, which I'd really appreciate. Genuinely for my own purposes too, and I do like getting feedback about. So yes, I've got name cards, business cards, and some feedback forms, with a $100 gold card gift card to one of them randomly picked, which I might even pick it if everyone fills it out after. That would be very greatly appreciated. But yeah.
Can I have 5 minutes after when this is finished with you?
Absolutely, yeah. So after this, I'm going to just chat one-on-one or coffee in hand. But yeah, any other questions about anything at all, or?
If you didn't know, Shaun was a reality TV show. Is filming a reality TV show today. No, actually, if you saw the invitation, you would have seen a very fresh-faced young man on the invitation. And I said, that doesn't look like you, mate. You need some new photos. So we are. Shaun's just getting a few photos. Thanks, guys. I think you'd all agree that was pretty insightful.
Yeah,
It was very good.
Yeah.
Thank you.
So, Shaun's a friend of mine, and I just tell everyone I meet, if you need any help, go straight to Shaun. He's the man. I'm sure that there's many ways to engage with you, whether it's just one-off things or check-ins however. Shaun will talk to you about that if you want to work with him. But yeah, I recommend him. And we've got some morning tea and coffee for you now, and we can do some little tours for the people who've come to have a look as well. Yeah. And you get a chance to spend with Shaun. Okay? All right.
If it's all right.